Well, hi there. Warm welcome. You're watching Blueprint Explosive Exclusive, and I'm Meghna Deka. Well, it's a master stroke to hedge our risks in an uncertain world of Trump's tariffs. Well, over the course of the show, we will explain just how Trump has turned free trade agreements, or FTA, and watching it very closely as India signs one after the other such trade pacts with leading economies across the world, making FTA India's Brahmastra. Well, that's right. We will be decoding India's Arthashastra and how the balance sheet is faring after 50% Trump tariffs were imposed on India. Can the 15 FTAs counterbalance the protectionist MAGA push from America? That's the question. So today, as India inks a free trade agreement with New Zealand, we are going to explain to you how we should view it, not just a free trade agreement with New Zealand, but view it holistically. Beg your pardon? Holistically from the point of the global economy as well. In fact, in the midst of certain uncertainties, India has accelerated the trade pacts to steady the ship and has put it on course of Atmanirbharta. Why do we say that? Well, watch on your map. We are going to tell you about all the FTAs that India has signed so far. Well, so far, there have been 15 FTAs. So clearly, FTAs have been put in top gear under the Modi Sarkar. This is a top priority for India. 15 FTAs covering 26 different countries and 6 preferential trade agreements with other 26 nations have been signed while negotiating with more than 50 other partners. You can see those countries on your screen, one after the other. We are going to keep firing so that you get a sense of which all are the countries that we have had. In fact, we are going to tell you about how this web of trade pact, there are these countries with which India has signed the trade pacts to ensure that you have bolstered economic ties as well. For example, you have United Kingdom, there is Switzerland, Norway, there is Iceland, there is Liechtenstein, Mauritius, Oman, UAE, Australia, and New Zealand. Of course, the latest one inked tonight has been that of New Zealand. Well, now let's decode. What does the historic free trade agreement between India and New Zealand really mean to people like you and me? For example, when it comes to Indian exports, there are going to be zero customs duty across sectors such as textiles, such as pharma, such as engineering goods, automobiles, IT services as well. When it comes to exports from New Zealand to India, it is going to be either zero or reduced tariff on about 95% of the products. And what is it that India is getting from New Zealand? Sheep meat gets cheaper, wool gets cheaper, seafood, coal, and timber. Also, when it comes to services and mobility, there's going to be market access in 118 service sectors, which is given to India. 5,000 temporary work permits are also going to be given. Working holiday visas are also going to be provided. Post-study work and rights up to 4 years. That's going to be a huge boost, especially for the Indian students who want to study in New Zealand. And when it comes to investments, $20 billion worth of investments by New Zealand over the next 15 years in India. And where are they going to be investing it? It is going to focus on MSMEs, it is going to focus on farmers and youth. That's going to be what the FTA overall is going to be promoting. So viewers, India's trade track with New Zealand, of course, shows a fluctuating, however, an overall upward trend over the past 5 years with a notable surplus in the exports in most of the fiscal years. You can see those on your screens. The imports are there in blue and the exports are there in red. If you want to go through it one by one, let's tell you about it. In the financial year of 2021, the imports were 381. The exports from India were 486, of course, in India's favor. Financial year 2020, it was $347 million of imports and exports were $487 million. In the financial year of 2023, the imports were $477 million and the exports were worth $546 in the year 2024. As you can see, again, there was a huge jump up. And here the imports had gone up to $335 million, exports worth $538 million. Now, it's important for us to understand how this year is expected to progress. 2026, the expectations are that the imports are going to be around $356 million, and the exports are going to be projected around $343 million after the FTA. Now, viewers, the trade pact is, of course, being hailed as a historic leap in India's global trade journey. Well, Prime Minister Narendra Modi, New Zealand's Prime Minister Christopher Luxon have sealed this India-New Zealand deal that we've been talking about, the FTA, a landmark pact which is wrapped up in merely 9 months. That's how it was fast-tracked. Prime Minister Modi has hailed the deal as being historic. In fact, he's put out that post that you can see on your screens. He says it's a historic moment for India and New Zealand. Strong push to bilateral trade, to investment as well. Also, it's going to be a milestone deal which has been completed in 9 short months. These things, remember, can go on for years, if not decades. The longest, perhaps, was that of the India-UK FTA, the Free Trade Pact. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Modi has said that this trade pact has strengthened economic ties between the two nations, India and New Zealand. FTA ensures greater access to markets as well. FTA opens the door for the youth and for students as well. That's very, very critical. In fact, this is what Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal had to say as he lauded the landmark FTA deal between India and New Zealand.
This is a free trade agreement with New Zealand, which is both comprehensive and forward-looking, reflecting the vision of our two leaders, Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Luxon. This FTA provides opportunities for all sections of our export community and at the same time helps every region of the country, north, south, east, west, northeast, in different areas.
Now, Prime Minister Modi's Arthashastra, as we are calling it, is now translating into massive global economic gains. Let's explain it to you. Why from zero duty access in key FTAs to unlocking billions in exports and foreign investment, India's new age trade diplomacy is rewriting the rules. In fact, here's how. First, we are going to look at the 99% exports duty-free. Yes, that's right. Zero duty access has been given in some of the key FTA nations, which is UK, in UAE, in European FTA, as well as in Oman. In addition to that, there is $23 billion plus, more than that, of UK market, which has been opened up for India, because nearly all Indian exports are tariff-free in the UK, making it cheaper there. When it comes to the India-New Zealand Trade Pact, let's tell you how it is going to double, expected to double the trade from $1.8 billion to $3.6 billion in the next 5 years alone. Also, let's look at how it is going to help bring in investment from New Zealand. From $20 billion of New Zealand's investment is expected, because it's already in the pipeline, and these investments are going to be across 15 years and mostly predominantly in manufacturing and in the service sector area. Let's also tell you about the $2 billion export boost which comes in from the FTA that India has with Oman, because this is projected to rise in the Indian exports in the next 2 to 3 years. So we have newer markets that we are going to be exploring. The European FTA, a mega deal which is going to bring in $100 billion worth of investments, which is expected, and it is also projected that it will bring along 1 million jobs in the next 15 years alone. FTA export growth is expected to increase by over 14.5%. And these exports will be to FTA markets which are going to be far outpacing the FTAs in the markets where we do not have an FTA. Also, if you look at the lower costs, higher competitiveness is going to be brought in, because Indian goods are now going to be much cheaper in some of the global markets. That also means, because the tariff has already cut, some of them from 5 to 20%. In some of the cases, it's merely 0%. No tariff on Indian goods, the more FTAs that India continues to sign in the future as well. Well, there are analysts who are saying that 15 have been done already, and India is now eyeing 21. Well, with the global trade increasingly now shaped by tariff disputes, geopolitical tension, well, India has been betting that a wider network of trade agreements are going to be helping in cushioning the external shocks and anchor its export ambitions, which is why FTAs have become this Brahmastra for Modi's economic strategy. In fact, this will ensure deeper integration into the global supply chains. Also, it will ensure stronger export growth and a sustained job creation for Indians. Also, by lowering the tariffs and setting predictable trade routes, important to say predictable trade routes, the pacts would help Indian businesses and also help India's partners in understand and preempting what next. In fact, they're going to ensure that we continue to remain very competitive and also expand and get access to newer and newer markets in future. It will also ensure that there are going to be swifter trade negotiations in future. Whatever has happened has already happened. The trade deals have been signed, but in future too, these negotiations are going to be much swifter. India now has trade pacts, remember, with virtually all the major global economies except for China. What does it really mean? That it is going to insulate you from things such as war. And that is very, very critical, because war and the tariff uncertainty, all of that is what you are creating a buffer for. So as the US turns inward and Trump tariff threats loom large once again, India is fortifying its global trade defenses as well. Free trade agreements are emerging as the biggest strategic shield in reducing the overdependence on a volatile US market. Well, here's why. Why do we say that? Because it axes India's dependence on America. It cuts down on the over-reliance on a very volatile market that we have seen America become. It also will shield us from MAGA, Make America Great Again policies, essentially a shield from US's protectionist policies. Also, this is going to help dodge tariff shocks as well, as Indian goods continue to remain cheaper elsewhere, giving us other alternatives to sell our goods in. Also, it diversifies the export hubs. Now you have newer markets for Indian goods, such as Europe, such as Gulf, Asia Pacific, Latin America. The more FTAs, greater the markets that our goods will have. Also, the bargaining power for India really goes up, because trade network gives India a leverage even while it discusses a trade pact with United States. Also, it's going to ensure that it protects jobs and export growth as well, and buffers jobs from American exports slowdown. Beg your pardon. So let me go across to our panelists. Today, joining us on the show, we have Adel Nazarian, a US analyst. Thank you so much, Adel, for joining us. Also, Dr. P.K. Basu is joining us, an economist. I'm going to come across to you first, Adel Nazarian. As I was just explaining to all our viewers, India has managed to stitch together at least 15 different FTAs and trade pacts with several of these global economies. Barring China, almost every other big economy has a trade pact with India now. Is United States getting a bit wary, because this is likely to give India a greater negotiating power as well when it talks to America?
Thank you. Great to be on with you. So here's how I would frame it, honestly. I'd say President Trump's tariffs are a battering ram and India's FTAs are a blueprint. And, excuse me, the way that it works is, America's been saying, stop cheating, and India's been saying, here's a better system. So in that regard, I think that while Trump's tariffs exposed how badly the global trade system favored China, India and Modi's FTAs have really offered companies an exit ramp from China without chaos. So in fact, what I think is happening here is President Trump's going to see that this is not competition, it's very complementary. And I think what's important here is to know that the US and India actually need each other. So Trump's tariffs, they crack the old system, and India's FTAs are essentially assembling the new one. The mistake would be to treat them as opposing strategies instead of sequential ones. There's really an amazing opportunity here for the US and India to come together. And I think that instead of fearing India's FTAs, America should plug into them. It's leverage. And conversely, India shouldn't fear US tariffs, which they don't. They should leverage them. And of course, at the end of the day, China fears both. And I think that's the thing here. I mean, if you think about it, tariffs are like shock therapy and trade deals are the rehabilitation. You
Right.
need both.
Well, I think I agree with you there, Adele, and I'll bring in Dr. Basu as well. Would you agree to say that these FTAs, yes, it is likely to buffer India's economy from any of the uncertainties, but it is more about hedging our bets rather than burning bridges with America? Would you say that?
Well, I think what is good about
There's
what has
definitely
happened with the U.S., I mean, there's been a breakdown in the India-U.S. economic relationship
Yes.
since August, and India has used that as an opportunity to undertake significant economic reform. So we've had labor market reforms
Yes.
that were notified at the end of November. We've had significant cuts in GST rates.
GST rates.
And now we've got a slew of FTAs with other countries. Oman, New Zealand, the UK, of course, predated the trouble with the US. You know, the European Free Trade Area started at the beginning of October. So we've got a slew of new FTAs being negotiated and completed, which offer a buffer. But it is still the fact that the United States is the world's largest market. India is still negotiating with the US. I personally would have preferred to see, you know, even an incomplete deal, but a deal done before the first August deadline. It wasn't done. The good thing is that India has used the opportunity to undertake other economic reforms, strengthen the Indian economy for the long term. And of course, India is the world's fastest growing economy by a long way, 8.2% real GDP growth on average for the past 4.5 years, which is absolutely spectacular. And in fact, even in the latest month, what was interesting was that in November, India's exports grew 19%, including 22% growth in the US. Of course, some of that is because of a calendar effect, because of the Diwali holiday being in November last year and not this year. So there was a bit of a calendar effect that helped, but in general, even the export sector has held up reasonably well.
Absolutely.
And India has
there was a lot of apprehension about the 50% Trump tariffs, how that's going to impact our export. That hasn't happened. That has been offset by a lot of these free trade agreements which have happened. But then you wanted to come in because it is undeniable. Dr. Basu too has pointed out, undeniable that India and US's economic ties have taken a hit. Many have said it is the tariff terror, which is the reason behind it. How do you see it progressing from here onwards?
Look, I have to say, America is still the world's most powerful consumer market. And India is the only democracy that can absorb manufacturing at China's scale. And so I think at the end of the day, whatever's been done, the relationship is temporarily in a reprieve. I think that they're both going to realize, both Trump and Modi, that there is more benefit of them working together than standing apart. I really, really do. And at the end of the day, I'll say this, one without the other leaves a vacuum that China will fill. It's going to be the same situation in the Middle East. Right, you withdraw.
I think we have shared goals there when it comes to China. Dr. Basu?
Well, you see, what is interesting is that when the RCEP was signed 5 years ago now, India chose not to join it. But as of today, with the FTA with New Zealand being completed, India now has an FTA with all the members of RCEP. India has an FTA with South Korea, with Japan, with Australia, New Zealand, as well as with the ASEAN countries. And so we effectively are within RCEP ex-China. And that was essentially the goal. The goal was to ensure that we have strong relationships with all our economic partners in Asia. But China is different because China is not a free trader. China has a non-market economy. It has a system of credit that is completely non-market oriented. And of course, it simply produces and adds to capacity without considering profitability. And so it dumps. China dumps its excess capacity in the world. And this has happened in sector after sector. So we don't need to have an FTA with China unless China is willing to remove its non-tariff barriers and move to a more market-oriented economy.
Well, that's a bit unlikely, at least not in the coming future do we expect that. So, essentially, India's got FTAs, about 16 odd FTAs, looking at over 20 such FTAs, perhaps in the coming years. We'll have to wait and see how this is going to offset what may happen in an uncertain world, because that's what we are dealing with, an uncertain world. These FTAs with other nations is not to burn any bridges with America or Trump's rule. However, it may help in offsetting some of those risks, essentially hedging our bets. Well, that perhaps is going to be Bharat's Arthashastra. Well, thank you so much, Adel Nazarian, for joining us, as well as Dr. P.K. Basu. Without a short break, don't go anywhere.